Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Today's roundtable will explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, housing, and financial services. I'm joined by my colleague, Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia. For the record, my name is Adriano de Jesus Espaillat. So Jesus is in the house. 2.0. Okay. He's Jesus. I'm the Jesus of Jesus, right? The first roundtable convened key leaders to examine the transformative impact of AI technology under Executive Order 14110, right? Leaders highlighted AI's potential on a host of things, including AI literacy across. That's something that's very important to me, as I feel that the young people in my district could be left 1,000 years behind if they're not provided with AI literacy. Also, small businesses in my community have to be able to benefit from AI as it will become more and more competitive to small businesses that offer goods and services that are not able to rely on AI. From agriculture to education, everything will be impacted while addressing also the traditional barriers of inclusion and discrimination and biases and all of the things that could be dragged in um, without our efforts to cure that. Okay. The second roundtable delved into consumer technologies, emphasizing the need of regulatory framework to ensure fairness and inclusion in AI adoption. And today's roundtable brings together diverse voices to address challenges, opportunities in AI-driven advancement in housing affordability, financial inclusion, and sustainable community development. So these three areas are critical, particularly for me, the housing affordability, because New York City and my district, as I'm sure Congressman Garcia's district, face a housing affordability crisis, as does America for that matter. AI is already reshaping these sectors with around 60% of landlords using AI already as a screening tool. So this is huge that almost three quarters or 60% of the landlords are using that as a screening tool, and 37% relying primarily on algorithmic recommendations. So it's already in place and impacting dramatically in the housing business. Yet these systems often they lack transparency. They risk perpetuating inequities, disproportionately hurting, impacting low-income renters and minority groups. So this is important that we tackle this. On the financial side, AI it expands credit access, expands to credit access and personalized investment strategy, as well as data privacy. There are concerns with algorithmic bias and ethical dilemmas beyond urgent attention. Today, we'll dive into these and how we can ensure these innovations promote equity, fairness, and opportunities for all. With that, I turn over to my colleague in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Chuy Garcia.
Thank you, colleague Espaillat, and of course to the distinguished panelists this afternoon who will share some of the latest uses and innovations of AI, and I hope that you'll also address some of the concerns that the chairman of this roundtable has conveyed to all of us. I look forward to your presentations, again, expressing the gratitude to be able to learn more about this growing sector of our society, world, and of course our economy and everything that it is driving. We of course strive to look at all the good that can be derived from it while we in the future take measures to eliminate or lessen potential harms that could come from it. But very grateful that you all will be sharing your experience and expertise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, and we've also been joined by Congresswoman Andrea Salinas from Oregon's 6th District, who's also someone that's very much invested and interested in the AI development. Congresswoman, you have something to share with us? Oh, all right. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's ask our first questions from Gerald Holder, who is, or rather, hear from Gerald Holder, who's from the Council of a large public housing authority, and he'll get 5 minutes to talk about AI's role in modernizing public housing. Welcome, Gerald.
Thank you. Thank you. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to participate in this roundtable on AI. It's an emerging field among housing authorities. And but before I get into that, let me just tell you a little about who we are. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. The Council of Large Public Housing Authorities were comprised of about 80 of the largest housing authorities across the country, as it says in our name, and which means that we're in the major metropolitan areas. And our members, we collectively own and manage nearly 40% of the public housing out there, and we also administer more than a quarter of the Housing Choice Voucher program. And we also provide a wide array of other programs, services, and rental assistance. As we were looking at this question on generative AI, essentially, we're aware that, AI can be used to create fake images and audio and video that, perpetrate, fraud and disinformation. And while, housing authorities are concerned about these negative impacts of AI, such as the poor use of and bias in AI-generated facial recognition software, for example, our members, by and large, do not use facial recognition software in their housing authorities. And before coming today, we double-checked with New York City Housing Authority, and which is the largest housing authority in the nation, and they also do not use it and have no intention to employ it. We're also aware that HR 5358, the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act of 2023, which was introduced by Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, essentially would prohibit the use of biometric recognition technology in certain federally assisted housing authorities, and including, federally assisted housing, including public housing. But our members are looking at positive ways of using AI. So they're beginning to use AI to free up staff to focus on meeting important resident needs. And some of those ways are, using AI for online chat boxes and allowing staff to focus on resident needs that require human intervention. For example, last month, we had our annual fall meeting, and we had a housing authority member give a presentation on how they use AI to create a more efficient, cost-effective response to incoming calls. They were being inundated with more than 2,000 calls a week, and they were really only able to answer about 500 of those calls with staff and now with an AI generated call center, they have resolved about 80% of those calls. They have a 92% reduction in wait times on those calls. And, excuse me, 75% of the call takers were reallocated to other tasks. In other words, they were also very concerned about, staff being concerned about the loss of their jobs and that sort of thing. And so essentially no one was fired. Any reductions that occurred in staff, occurred through attrition. And they made a determination that they didn't want AI to be a means to replace the human caseworkers that are, working in those housing authorities, only to supplement the caseworkers. So what they encountered was a 30% reduction in caseworker call volume, and they made over $400,000 in savings in their first year. I mean, this is one of the positive ways that housing authorities are using AI in a very efficient manner and cost-effective manner. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I have 1 minute, okay, because I got a lot here. Let me just also say that AI can rapidly facilitate collaborations across different facets of healthy communities. In other words, it can be used in problem-solving ways. It's a way of providing predictive maintenance of equipment and buildings. It's a way to optimize resource allocation. And it's a way, as I just outlined, a way to provide waitlist management. We also had another presenter who spoke about using AI in visual assessments. In other words, looking at the structural integrity of some of their facilities with the housing authority. In other words, it can detect cracks and damages, make sure that the facility is ADA compliant, and other safety checks like with local hazards, identifying molds and pests and that sort of thing. And also in terms of energy efficiency, they can spot heat leaks, insulation issues, and pollution sources. Okay.
We'll wait for the questions. We're gonna hear from each of the panelists, and then we're gonna begin with questions. Now let's hear from Ariane Parks, Senior Director of Enterprise Community Partners, and looking at how using AI to advance affordable housing solutions. Thank you, Ariane.
Great. Thank you very much, Congressman. I am pleased to be here today. I think like many of the folks here, start off just with a caveat. I'm not an AI expert, but I am an expert in CDFI and affordable housing. I've worked with hundreds of CDFIs across the country. Before Enterprise, worked managing the CDFI Coalition, and I've worked with SBA microlenders. And at Enterprise, we also own and operate about 14,000 affordable homes in the Mid-Atlantic that serve as great places to live for approximately 24,000 people. And we also are one of the largest low-income housing tax credit syndicators in the country. So we have about $15 billion in our portfolio under asset management. And so, I think this is something that we are really looking at. I will say that it's exciting in terms of the future of technology. And I think that CDFIs like Enterprise and affordable housing organizations really should be at the forefront in embracing this change. But at the same time, I think we need to be cautious about how we approach that. But I say we should be at the forefront because we have long been advocating for racial equity and access to capital, helping folks build up their credit, and making sure that everyone has the same opportunity to affordable quality homes across the country. So in affordable housing in particular, AI software is being used to code property level invoices, automate data visualization, sorry, there's a little bit, data visualization. Thank you. I'll just move it back just a little bit. So, and data processing, basically, we think that AI could be really helpful in terms of how we can streamline some of our processes and make it more organized for human review. We also have been hearing about how it could potentially be used to do construction monitoring. We've heard about, the ability to be able to have cameras at construction sites, and so you'd actually be able to see where things stand in the process. I think that could probably be used in terms of all types of community development. We use the New Markets Tax Credit, so outside of housing could also be used for those types of construction projects, which would really, I think, increase efficiency and effectiveness of some of those programs, and helping a lot of our very overwhelmed employees do their jobs more thoroughly. So not as a way of, getting rid of jobs, but really, I think affordable housing organizations, CDFIs, are constantly doing a lot with very few resources and leveraging as much as they can to make the biggest impact. And so we're seeing this as an opportunity to be able to deepen some of our work. We also think that it has the potential to close the racial homeownership gap, but we do think it's crucial that these algorithms are trained with intentional modeling. We need to make sure that communities most impacted by disparate impacts must be involved in unraveling those data sets for targeted markers and modeling, so that AI continues to improve how it interprets good or bad candidates. There have been, I think that also goes into how do we evaluate credit? And so that's something that we're doing as a part of our normal process. And I think it really goes into, you train your staff and you try to make sure that bias is being addressed up front. And I think we need to have that same sort of intentionality as we look at algorithms being used in any of these models, the same way that we would train our employees. And I think, to some effect, once it's coded in, as long as it's a closed system, you're going to have less opportunities for going outside of that than you might otherwise. So for CDFIs like Enterprise, which is real estate focused, we're a real estate focused loan fund, it isn't playing a huge role yet, but we are working with a number of partners, including beneficial state banks, underwriting for racial justice program, to look at, it's a tech firm, we're working with a tech firm to use participant data and predictive analysis to look at factors of underwriting and access to creditworthiness and how to expand those criteria. And then one of our other partners, National Community Investment Fund, has been working on an AI platform as well to catalyze impact investment as well. From a concern perspective, I just say that, we are really concerned about privacy. Obviously, we have a lot of personal information that is collected. We want to make sure as we start to look into it as an organization that we have the proper guardrails in place. And I think from a federal government perspective, that will be really important to make sure that, where is this data going? So even if we were to construct an algorithm that's 100% unbiased, which, that pie in the sky there, but where is that data going? And so making sure that privacy controls are being implemented, that information isn't being leaked. And so, I think that, again, CDFIs have those deep community connections. We have people-focused impact when compared to a lot of other traditional financial institutions. And I think that this could really be helpful in furthering that mission of affordable housing and community development organizations. And I think that we are well positioned to help shape AI and help with putting those guardrails in place.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to hear from AJ Badalia, Head of North America Public Policy and Government Affairs Cohort. Thank you, AJ.
Can you hear me? Maybe I'll
Yes.
go a little closer. Good afternoon, and thank you to the CHC, both staff and members, for putting this incredible event on and asking, I think, many of the right questions regarding AI and AI adoption. I'll start with a brief introduction about Cohere and then talk a little bit about some of the issues that have been raised so far. So my name is Adriano Espaillat. As mentioned, I lead government affairs for Cohere. Cohere is a foundational model startup. We build our models, we build frontier models specifically for enterprise and public sector government use in particular. Our founder, Aidan Gomez, was actually one of the 8 authors of the Transformer paper that started this whole trend. So I like to say he's one of the few people I think that fully appreciated both the benefits and the risks that come along with the use of AI technologies today. Our key focus as a company is on privacy, security, and multilingual in our technologies and implementation of our technology. So as was just mentioned, we do not train on customer data. We are SOC 2 compliant, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the use of AI technologies, particularly in regulated industries. Some of our biggest customers come from these industries, Oracle, TD Bank, Johnson Lambert, so on and so forth. So we have a front row seat to the adoption of these technologies today. And since day one, we have been focused on the practical risks that come along with the use of AI technologies. I think some have talked about far off doomsday scenarios, killer robots, and so on and so forth. And we consider critical questions around adoption of the technology not questions about caution, but actually critical questions about promoting adoption. So things like privacy and bias and trust in technology are the kinds of questions we get every day from customers who want to integrate and do the right thing and follow the proper regulations and laws that come along with this as well. So I'll say, look, AI has tremendous potential. It has, I think, has been mentioned before and in previous roundtables, the potential to really actually promote and help communities of color and communities who are facing issues with adoption of various technologies and so on and so forth. This can be everything from helping promote credit scoring models that often exclude individuals without formal credit histories to promoting financial literacy. AI tools can be used to kind of promote interactive and personalized financial education as well as adoption just generally, including in languages that they may be speaking, so coming to them where they are today. And then all the way to the other side of the coin, which is cyber fraud, protecting these communities that might be most likely to be affected from the kinds of fraud you may see on a day-to-day basis as we get into a more dangerous world in particular. But one of the biggest questions we get from companies is actually on bias. Bias is one of the areas where we have been doing a ton of research because developing an evaluation on bias in the context of specific customer use cases is particularly difficult. And it's a major challenge, particularly for us, because you need sufficient data to conduct the kinds of testing that you might need to ensure that you are not biased against or models are not biased against a particular use case as well. And this is actually a common problem on the uses of AI models generally. How do you protect and prevent models from unsafe outputs without having the data of those exact specific examples, which is actually an area that we have spent, as I mentioned, both in our red teaming and safety work, how to do research in that work as well. We actually use an open source data set called BOLD to help ask the model and red team the model on particular questions around everything from racial, religious, political affiliation, and so on and so forth as well. But our 4 biggest issues as we think about bias in particular in these models is around data diversity, as I just mentioned, around algorithmic fairness, particularly techniques such as fairness constraints, around human oversight. We commonly tell our customers that these are not replacement level technologies, at least not yet. These are technologies that are used to help support people today, and that there should always be a human in a loop. And then, of course, continuous monitoring. We are strong believers that you can't just let an AI model run loose. You need to certainly have, and our customers know this as well, have continuous monitoring on what these things do, have regular auditing and work that comes along with it as well. I'll leave with AI has tremendous potential, but it needs to have proper safeguards. And we are committed to working with the CHC and other lawmakers in particular on how we can get this right. Because as I said, these questions are not questions about caution, but they're questions actually about adoption today. There are laws already in place, regulations already in place that actually ask some of these critical questions. So how can we ensure that these technologies are answering some of these things as well? Thank you very much.
You just also say that we're being followed online by over 200 people, so the room is full. And now let's hear from, welcome to all those 200 plus people that are watching. Now let's hear from Robert Suarez and Musaddiq Hassanali of Bethpage FCU and America's Credit Union. You have
Yes.
2.5 minutes apiece.
2.5. Actually, I'm going to dominate the conversation.
Yes.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for convening this roundtable and affording us the opportunity to contribute to this incredibly important conversation. One of my core mandates at Bethpage as its Chief Transformation Officer is to reimagine and strengthen how Bethpage can continuously deliver value for its members, to transform our ways of working by, for example, looking at emerging technologies such as generative AI. Bethpage has had a long and storied history rooted in our ongoing commitment to serve and enable our members and communities. But beyond that, we have an ethos of service, fairness, and a member-first mindset. Artificial intelligence at its widest definition has been around for decades, but it's only with the recent developments of generative AI has it become topic du jour and contemporary. These recent and rapidly improving advancements allow AI to be transformative technologies with the potential to fundamentally shape how we serve our members. However, not unlike other emerging technologies, AI has not fundamentally altered credit unions' historical role as relationship lenders, committed to maintaining a close bond with the communities we serve. These types of technologies cannot be seen merely as a lever to maximize efficiency or profit, but rather to act as a catalyst to expand the breadth and depth of services of products that we provide. Under the right conditions, AI can help us transcend the limitations of traditional underwriting, deepen our understanding of member needs, and more nimbly respond to the financial aspirations of the populations who have been historically underserved. While many organizations have been quick to embrace AI at its core, at Bethpage, we've been extremely intentional, if not conservative. Our journey with AI has just begun, but only after we've put in certain constructs and guardrails in place. Through joint oversight and involvement from our internal compliance, risk, legal, and technology departments, any potential AI technology is reviewed thoroughly, from deep and rigorous model regression testing to ensuring any curated content that's created is appropriate and meets our standards and obligations. We'll also ensure, for example, in the case of chatbots, we'll be transparent on the interactions and will allow members the opportunity to interact with a Bethpage representative should they choose to do so. At Bethpage, we recognize that responsible use of AI mandates compliance with various regulations and laws, such as the Fair Housing Act, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and others. We embrace these technologies in a mindful way, choosing not to delegate our institutional responsibilities to any algorithm. As we continue to fortify our AI strategy and approach, it becomes evident really quickly that AI-enabled tools can accelerate financial inclusion. Machine learning models fortified with responsibly curated data can incorporate non-traditional data points to provide a more holistic and accurate view of a member's financial resilience. With a single proof of concept that we have in place right now, we've seen an immediate net increase of 10% on approvals on our consumer loan products. That means getting money into the hands of members who need it and as quickly as possible. It's these kinds of technologies that help us enhance our services to our members and can level the playing field for credit unions against larger and highly resourced institutions. Legislative and regulatory assessments of these technologies must embrace balanced and flexible approaches from a risk management perspective and can accommodate innovation while protecting consumers. We believe that AI can be a potent instrument whose value is correlated to how we choose to wield it. While many organizations may choose to leverage AI to maximize profit margins, at Bethpage, we would only choose to use AI as a means to advance financial inclusion and to deliver against our mission, which is to service our members and help them achieve their financial goals, ultimately supporting the long-term economic vitality of the communities we serve. Thank you.
Our next panelist, Muzadek Usanati. I hope I pronounced it right. Oh, yes, he did. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry. Robert, right? Okay, let's hear from Noel Porter.
Awesome. So we haven't actually explicitly said this in the room today, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that AI in its current context is incredibly racist. It takes inputs from our racist systems, and it oftentimes makes those inputs far more inflexible when we think about how it affects end users. We have to accept this to make sure that we actually are building in the guardrails and making the accommodations to AI so that we don't further ingrain racism in our housing systems. I'm going to talk today specifically about tenant screening. Similar in context to credit screening in the market, what we realized very quickly as a proliferation of credit screening companies grew up was that they needed regulation. And from that, we got FCRA. But tenant screening companies are not actually currently subject to anything like FCRA or subject to FCRA itself. Credit screening alone dictates your ability to build wealth, access lending, find work, start a business, or find housing. And we have no federal regulation of any kind for these tenant screening companies, which are rapidly growing in the market. And as you said, Congressman, which are rapidly growing as a percentage share of what housing companies or housing providers are using to select their tenants. The typical application of a tenant screening product for multifamily housing means that the owner or landlord will hire an outside company, give the company their list of screening requirements, or take a list of screening requirements from the tenant screening company, which may perpetuate more stringent standards, identify risks that landlords were not previously concerned about, or drive in place more biased algorithms and decision-making checkpoints for how to screen tenants. And then the company returns to the landlord a red X or a green check. Often tenants and the landlords don't have access to the reasons for denial or the underlying materials that supported the claim. They don't have an opportunity to appeal or to cure the decision that was made. And they don't have an opportunity for individualized assessment as an opportunity for those applicants to make claims against the red X they received from the tenant screening company. When we consider application fees and how often folks are paying $50 or $100 every time they apply, if they don't know the tenant screening criteria of the landlord, if they don't know whether or not they will receive a red X or a green check, these individuals or families might be making 10, 15, dozens of applications, paying $50 or $100 each time without understanding what is holding them back from access to the rental market. We know that the feeder systems then for the tenant screening are discriminatory in themselves, right? Criminal legal system contact disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. Credit scores bake in and perpetuate discrimination and further the wealth gap. And we take these two systems and send them into a further unregulated system to decide who has access to housing. These systems are also error prone. They pull from various databases. Again, because they're unregulated, it might be websites that are unregulated, credit, criminal legal, findyourfriend.com. They use arrests that may not have become convictions even when the tenant screening criteria for the building needs adjudication for criminal offenses. They oftentimes locate incorrect identities, individuals with the same name. In one example where we're in ongoing litigation, there's a single man assigned to review individual cases when the algorithm comes down and says, we don't know which Miguel Suarez is applying for the apartment, and the single man at the back of the algorithm chooses one or the other to input into the system. Again, you receive that red X on the back end and you're unable to adjudicate to find out how this decision happened, and that might be following you around in further tenant screening revisions. What we would recommend is that tenant screening absolutely needs to be subject to FCRA or to new tenant screening regulation law. We need to clarify that tenant screening should be subject to fair housing laws and regulation. We also need to mandate that tenants have an individualized assessment opportunity when they are harmed or wronged by tenant screening decisions that are made by AI. We need to allow tenants access to tenant screening policies up front, to any reason for denial if they're denied access to housing, and for the relevant supporting information that made that decision. I really want to underscore as I close this out that in the first iteration of the incoming administration, there was the introduction of a new disparate impact regulation. I have trouble even calling it such. Trump's original disparate impact regulation would have made it such that the use of a third-party screening company means that landlords are no longer subject to liability for disparate impact of their decision-making processes. So landlords can simply say, in our potential near future, it's not my fault we discriminated, we hired an outside company to do that. We have to advance regulation for these companies that would ensure that they are subject to federal regulation in the same way that credit screening companies are. And I'll close with this. There was an article in Biz Now by a reporter called John Bannister this morning, and it was talking about the use of AI in rent collection. And I actually happen to live in a private equity-owned Brookfield property where Elise, the chatbot, has come to my neighborhood. And Elise is an opportunity for landlords to take themselves out of the equation when it comes to collecting rent, addressing individual needs and decisions for tenants. And this is the quote that they made about leasing agents and the relief that they find when AI is brought in to collect rent. Leasing agents knew every month they had to do it. They got people fighting with them on the phone, fighting them in the office, calling in with sob stories on why they couldn't pay rent. And that introduces a lot of human biases in those conversations. Now we're able to remove that bias entirely with AI. For me, that means that we are able to remove the humanity out of how we make decisions about tenants and residents' access to shelter and permanent housing stability, and we need to make sure we're not removing those components from our decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. We like your T-shirt. It doesn't have my phone number, though.
It's got everybody's.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the switchboard.
Okay. They're all going to jump to Chuy Garcia's office. Okay. Thank you. Now we're going to listen to Maureen Yap, the National Fair Housing Alliance. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Yes.
And thank you, distinguished members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Just so you know, my full name is Maureen Carmen Yap, and my father was from Peru. And back in the day, I worked for Congressman Jose Serrano. So nice to be here. Thank you so much. As mentioned, I'm with the National Fair Housing Alliance. We are the only national civil rights organization dedicated solely to eliminating all forms of housing and lending discrimination. And we are also the trade association for over 170 local fair housing groups, some of which are in your district. So happy to be here. And what I'm going to do really quickly is discuss two foundational concepts. It's kind of building on what Noel said, and then quickly go over three things that we would recommend that Congress do with respect to AI. So first, it's been said, if you love the historical treatment of women and people of color, then you're going to love AI. And so what does that mean? Why do we say that? Well, that is because AI learns rules from historical data. So my colleagues here have talked a little bit about that. And let's take a quick example from Amazon. And this is in the employment context, but it applies just as well to the housing context, as Noel demonstrated. So what happens here is that Amazon decided they wanted to increase efficiency, which Gerard talked about, increasing the efficiency. And they wanted to more efficiently vet job applicants for software engineers. So they loaded up the resumes from the past 10 years of successful applicants. After a while, they noticed that they weren't getting any women applicants. And as you know, AI does not have a conscience. So what AI learned is that most of the software engineers were men, And so they felt the AI model, what it learned was that Amazon prefers men. So any resumes that said anything to do with women, women's sports, women's soccer, a women's college got kicked out. And so the good news is that they did do a post-deployment assessment, and they did realize that they were not recruiting women. In this case, they couldn't just tweak the model, they had to abandon it completely. So what's the key takeaway there? The key takeaway is without guardrails, as Noelle was talking about, AI will simply learn, replicate, and perpetuate discriminatory historical patterns. So the second concept is AI is just one person's opinion written in code. So what does that mean? That means that AI is not techno-magic. There are a lot of human decisions. That's why AJ's company gets revenue. So there are a lot of decisions that get made. So let's take a look at building on the Amazon example. And these are just a few of the key human decisions. So first of all, choosing the data. In this case, the developers at Amazon were choosing data that was not what's called representative. They had a representativeness problem. So there is a human decision about making sure that the data is representative, for example. So for example, does it exclude Latino consumers or does it include them? What does the data set look like that feeds the model? And then there's choosing the model. So one aspect of that is transparency and explainability. Is the developer choosing a model where they can then explain the decisions and the outputs? So we hear a lot, for example, with respect to adverse actions, which are required under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. But some folks are developing models saying, well, the model made the decision, kind of like Noelle was talking about, and kind of pushing off the liability and saying, well, we just can't explain it. That's a human decision as to the type of model that's chosen and developed. And then last, just one of many key human decisions is the risk management framework. So we've long had automated models, regression, all kinds of things that require model risk management. And so the question becomes, is the developer going to implement risk management that, for example, looks for a disparate impact, for example, on Latino consumers? Are they choosing a model and risk management that they can look at the disparate impact and then, as required by law, search for less discriminatory alternatives? So the key concept and key takeaway there is that AI is not techno-magic. There are key human decisions, which means that it can and must be regulated. So in terms of the three things that we would urge for Congress, number one is congressional oversight. And that's oversight of the federal agencies to use the existing civil rights laws to apply to AI now. So for example, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and many of the other civil rights law can be used now to look at the use of AI in housing and lending, especially mortgage lending. And the reason to do that is because these laws have stood the test of time. They're very robust. And so their questions can be asked about what the regulators are doing to oversee the institutions that they supervise. The second is comprehensive legislation. The existing civil rights laws are very robust. In addition, there are gaps and more specificity that could be lent to that. So we advocate for comprehensive legislation that contains a very strong civil rights framework. And then third, as Noelle mentioned with respect to disparate impact, voting down any legislation that prohibits the use of disparate impact. And that's a theory of discrimination where if the discrimination is not obvious, if it's hidden in the AI, then that is something that can be addressed through this theory, proven evidence. The Supreme Court has upheld that theory under the Fair Housing Act, and it has long been in use by the regulators, by the Department of Justice, but it is a key target of Project 2025 to do away with disparate impact theory. So we also have a handout that explains our legislative proposals in more detail. We'll share that afterwards, and thank you for the discussion. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And finally, we're going to hear from Bill Hulse from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to participate participate in the roundtable today. My name is Bill Hulse. I lead the Financial Policy Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. At the Chamber, I work with banks, credit unions, investment advisors, broker-dealers, and other financial companies to promote resilient financial markets that are grounded in consumer trust. Before joining the Chamber, I served as financial policy advisor to former Congressman.
Do you please?
Oh, sure. Before joining the Chamber, I worked for former Congressman Randy Hultgren and advised him his work on the Financial Services Committee and supported his work as the co-chair of the FinTech and Payments Caucus. The Chamber's been a leading voice and active participant in public policy discourse regarding the regulatory treatment of artificial intelligence. In 2022, the Chamber formed a Commission on Artificial Intelligence, Competitiveness, Inclusion, and Innovation, our AI Commission, chaired by former Representatives John Delaney and Mike Ferguson, and composed of academics, business leaders, ethicists, and technology leaders. The Chamber's AI Commission released a report in March 2023 that provides helpful findings and constructive framework for policymakers. Two key takeaways include that policy leaders must undertake initiatives to develop thoughtful laws and rules for the development of responsible AI and its ethical deployment, and that a failure to regulate AI will harm the economy, potentially diminish individual rights, and constrain the development and introduction of beneficial technologies. Where this gets interesting, if not admittedly complicated, is that many initiatives to regulate artificial intelligence in a specific context are not focused on the technology, but instead seek to address how AI is used in a particular business practice. But these business practices are oftentimes already highly regulated. For example, we already have labor laws, we already have conduct laws, antitrust laws, et cetera. So we need to understand how these existing laws apply in the evolving market and then use a gap-filling approach to make any tailored updates. Financial institutions have been utilizing artificial intelligence, different capacities for decades. Our member firms are currently using a variety of AI tools, including machine learning, and exploring future uses of large language models such as generative AI to support various use cases such as customer service, lending and underwriting, fraud detection and prevention, risk management, cybersecurity, marketing, and back office functions. Artificial intelligence's relevance to the capital markets can be thought of through a few different lenses: retail investor access to investment advice and opportunities, capital formation and growth of financial markets, and also RegTech, in other words, using artificial intelligence for compliance purposes. In January of this year, the Chamber sent a letter to the Securities and Exchange Commission on AI policy development. The letter cited a report that 85% of financial firms are already using artificial intelligence. Accordingly, the Chamber recommended to Chair Gensler that the SEC use roundtables and concept releases to engage stakeholders to determine the course and shape of AI policies. I was really grateful that we did the roundtable today. I think kind of this listening and learning sessions from all stakeholders is really the way to be approaching these issues. So currently, AI is helping financial institutions to support retail investors with high-quality investment advice and educational tools. As an example, by leveraging technology to evaluate geographic constraints and investment preferences, AI can match investors with financial advisors. AI also supports modeling for assets in an investment product and investor protection. AI can be a useful tool to support the growing participation of Americans in retail investing as well. Data indicates that the supply of financial advisors may not keep pace with the growing demand. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, firms are projected to add 42,000 new financial advisor jobs to meet the needs of the investing public in the future. However, according to another report, more than 109,000 financial advisors, which is 39% of headcount, are likely to retire in just the next 10 years. Taken together, these statistics demonstrate there may not be sufficient talent in the pipeline to meet this growing investor demand to access the capital markets. World Economic Forum report explains that the capital raising process has historically been labor intensive and inefficient, and that AI can help discover promising investment opportunities by tracking patterns that are not detectable through conventional research. In addition, AI is strengthening the capital markets infrastructure. The same World Economic Forum report further explains that AI will help to improve trade speed and price using dynamic execution methods and streamline post-trade processes and increase cost efficiency. Finally, to safely deploy AI, our member firms have been leading in developing risk management and government frameworks, such as maintaining human oversight, pilot programs, and technology experiments before having wider adoption of the use of AI in the marketplace. As a general principle, the Chamber believes in the principle of explainability for AI models that we've heard about today. Users must understand how the model functions and how it produces a certain output. But the degree of explainability for your AI systems will differ depending on several factors, including the context, the degree of risk, and the user type of AI involved. In other words, not all AI applications pose risk or the same risks, and consequently, not all AI applications will need to be explainable to all user types, at least not explainable to all user types in the same ways. For example, consumers and regulators may benefit from different types of explanations in the use of an AI model. Thank you for inviting me today, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you for being here. And now we'll go to questions. Congresswoman, do you have any questions?
Yes, to all the panelists. So I will just start by saying I'm agnostic in terms of, I think a lot of you have said this, right? The application of artificial intelligence could be used for some great things, right? We do have a workforce shortage. I hear about it constantly in my district. I'm just right outside the Silicon Forest and kind of part of it. So we're excited in a lot of ways, but I'm also nervous in a lot of ways, right? Because end users who may not even know that they're being subject to decisions made by AI could have adverse consequences, right? And especially in my Latino community, right? I also have the largest Latino community in Oregon. So I guess my question is, and as I serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, we've talked a lot about how do we regulate AI, but it is, to your point, Mr. Hulse, this has been around for a long time, right? So how do we either regulate AI or figure out, and what would the impacts be if we start to regulate it now when we see it actually being used in so many different applications in business and public life? And then, or is it better to overlay with some of the civil rights laws that you all talked about, or is it a combination of both? But it sounds to me like some of the pieces that are missing that many of you have talked about are that kind of human oversight and accountability right now. And so I think that's the piece where I'm more interested in what does that regulation of AI itself look like, and then the overlays. And I was trying to get up to speed because the AI task force did come out with their recommendations yesterday. I didn't have time to read all 88 of them while you were all talking. So would love any comments on that as well.
Yep, I can start. Thank you for the question, Congressman. That's a great question. I think thinking about the development of many technologies over time, they kind of start and proliferate, and then as we see how they develop, we start thinking about regulation. And so, of course, we always hear from industry that they can regulate themselves until something goes wrong. So you could think about the car industry, for example. Cars were made a certain way, but eventually it had to be the addition of seat belts and then requiring people to wear seat belts. So that's a very common thing. I think CFPB Director Rohit Chopra is fond of saying there's no magic tech exception to the rules, meaning that just because it's done through AI, and I'm old enough to remember when I first started at a law firm that many of the clients said, well, we are on the internet, and so we can't be regulated. And to a certain extent, they were right. They got Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, but it didn't start off that way. So I think it's fair to think about where we can add more parameters. We have a list of AI legislative priorities. I can say that we are working with the Lawyers Committee also to review Senator Markey's bill that talks about civil rights and AI. And I think what some of that is doing is taking the framework that's there and building on it in a more specific way. I think to your point, getting regulations, I don't think industry wants 50 states and territories with different regulations, and then for each, for the conglomerates, for each different type of sector that they touch, whether it's housing, financial services, employment. So I think thinking about something comprehensive that's a baseline at a federal level that states can go above is something we're thinking about. And we have some specific ideas, and there's lots of great ideas out there.
Maybe just double click, I guess, on what Bill mentioned, which is I think a sectoral approach to regulation and legislation is something that we very much support. I think from our perspective, how AI usage occurs in housing or in financial services is quite different than healthcare. And so I think looking at AI should apply and existing laws should apply to AI. We do not have a disagreement on that at all. It's largely filling the gaps and thinking through, as we work with our customers in particular, that's actually where we spend a lot of our time. It's actually about providing transparency about how the models work and then having a discussion about where the law stops and where we need to get clarity in particular. And so a sectoral approach in particular, we've seen, I think, different models of legislation and regulation across the world. Some consider technology-wide regulation, some consider sectoral in particular. And I think for our purposes, how we view this is you can't just regulate AI because it's a magical techno-whiz thing. It's not. It is a technology that has its flaws, it has its benefits, and I think thinking of it through the particular use case and the deployment context and the access control is extremely important.
My question is to Maureen, right? You mentioned about sort of like the inherent biases that are dragged in. You know, you mentioned an Amazon, particular case with Amazon and men. Is there room for a strategy to be developed, hemispheric strategy that will then bring a more balanced database and sample base that will guarantee a much fair scenario and result? Or what do you think about that?
Yes, I think there's a number of different ways, and I think folks are experimenting with that all the time. We have a research group that experiments with debiasing mortgage underwriting and pricing models, for example. And one of the places to start is with the data and kind of thinking about, okay, if we use this data, what's missing, what's not representative, what is kind of skewed here, so that we can think about what the output would be. And so being able to think through the life cycle of the data choices and the model development, even post-deployment, is something that can be done now. The question is, how are we going to make sure that it's a requirement? There is, to a certain extent, we can use existing law. We can ask the federal regulators to add more guidance around existing laws, which some of them have added some of that. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think we have talked to some industry partners that are kind of looking for more of a safe harbor, because there's many different ways to run a model for disparate impact, to determine whether there is an influence and a disadvantage to different protected classes. So there's many different ways to do it. It needs to be thoughtful, as AJ mentioned. It needs to consider the use case. But there are definitely ways to do that, and there are ways that congressional legislation can ensure that there is at least a floor.
Thank you. I have a question for Noel, too, regarding credit screening. And you mentioned that AI could be a little bit more heavy-handed in terms of credit screening. How far down do they go? I mean, do they go into one's insurance policy payments or payment of premiums, or how far down do they go? Are there new categories that they digging deeper into that will then adversely impact the person?
Absolutely, and I think a little bit this also goes back to your question, if you guys can hear me, for Maureen. So I think part of it is that when we look at, like, really, if we just held a tenant screening company up next to a credit screening company and the regulation that credit screening companies are subject to versus what tenant screening companies are able to do, right now a tenant screening company could really just conduct a Google search and then say Noel Porter was a red X. And they don't have to really tell us why. So they could use my Facebook page, and they could use my credit score, and they could find someone some one time where I had an interaction with law enforcement and that could look like I was arrested, but really I wasn't, and all of these different things, and push that forward. And because they are not even regulated on what sources they can use, they can find anything that rolls back into how they deliver. Obviously, we have larger companies that are operating under similar, under some regulatory principles and are working with some of the bigger firms. But we're in a lot of litigation right now where we're finding out that it was, I don't know, I found it on findme.com and it said you were arrested, and I didn't know I was looking at the wrong person's profile. And so it's not just how deep they can go, but are the sources correct? Is the data correct? What data are they using? We don't have regulations on any of that right now.
Thank you. And finally, my last question, Gerard, I know that in the New York City Housing Authority, one of the problems facing those over 400,000 residents that live in NYCHA property is the response time for repairs, right? Requests for repairs. And you actually get a ticket with a number, and it could take a year or two before that repair person comes to your apartment to patch up that problem, that leaky pipe or something. And how is AI being used to accelerate the response time for repair requests from tenants?
I know that NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, has been well. They recently had a scandal that they've had to respond to, and we are aware that they have improved their repair, their work orders, but quite frankly, I could not tell you exactly what they have employed in terms of using AI in that respect. Yeah.
You have any additional questions?
Congressman, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
So I live in a private equity-owned building, and I'm actually the tenant organizer for our organization, which I will say automation is making it much harder to be an organizer, because when you talk to the chatbot, it doesn't respond to your collective action. But I will say I live in a building where we just deployed a response system for maintenance requests, and it failed within the first week, and now we just don't have a response system for maintenance requests. So from personal experience, it's going well so far out there.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to the participants. We had close to 300 people tune in, and so we're very, we'll make sure we take your recommendations into consideration, as we have also from the task force 80 new plus recommendations, so we'll take a look at that. And the Congressional Hispanic Caucus will be looking at AI through economic development through AI tools as one of our goals and objectives for the next session. So we hope to be engaged with you on a regular basis to make sure that we get the best information from people like you. Thank you so much for being here.